Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today is a video I'm very excited for because for the longest time I've wanted to do some big projects, but I haven't been able to do that just because of the workspace situation. Well, I have the workspace now, I'm all situated, so this video marks the start of some big projects that I've had in my mind for a while. I am a little nervous going into this just because some of the things I'm gonna do are, well, things I've just never done before, so it's gonna be a huge learning curve, but that's just, you know, part of the process, part of the journey. And we're gonna kick off the big projects by doing some stuff to the V6 MR2. Initially, I didn't have any plans to really do anything to this car during the off season just because I feel like it's really well set up, and obviously like I'm the limiting factor at the moment, but the right deal came up and I was just like, you know what, screw it. So I ended up buying a big brake kit for this car. You're gonna notice that there's only 3 of them. That's because I was super excited about this, so I went ahead and already installed one of them, which was a good thing because that's when I realized that I didn't have enough clearance between the wheel and the caliper. So I have to run a spacer. It's a 12 mil. The reality is I only need a 5 mil, but that's just what I had laying around. What's super cool about this setup is that I even managed to get the parking brake calipers as well. So I'll still have a functioning e-brake. The install is gonna be like super easy. I undo the brake line over here, undo the clip. There's a clip right there that I undo. The caliper is just gonna unbolt. It's, I think, 4 bolts holding it all in. Pull off the rotor. Probably the biggest thing is removing the heat shield, but that's not really too bad. I just take some snips, which I got right here, and I use those just to kind of cut off the brake shield. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And just like that, we got everything off. Really, the most challenging part is getting the dust shield off, but even that's not too bad. I realized the technique for getting this off is just creating a couple little slits there and then cutting this bigger piece off because it makes it easier to bend. I do want to know, I believe some people may actually just go around this and trim like that because this does act like a bit of a cover to help keep some debris out from the wheel bearing. I'm not too concerned about that. What's really crazy to me is the weight difference between the old calipers and the new calipers. So this one, it's obviously way tinier than that, but it also weighs a lot more. I'm not a weight weenie, so I don't really care about weighing it, but just, yeah, this is significantly heavier than this, even though this is literally twice the size. I mean, just look at that comparison. Oh, quick little side note, that was really cool. When I bought the brake kit, I also got several sets of pads to go with it, which is sweet because these actually cost a good amount of money. Also, the difference in rotor size to me is absolutely insane. Again, it's literally twice the size. Right now, it's about putting the new to me parts back on. It comes with this little adapter. These holes right here on the outside or furthest away from each other, they attach to the knuckle, and then these ones will attach to the new caliper. One thing to note is that these rotors are directional, and if you go to the inside of them, they actually have a little arrow which tells you which direction they should spin, and it also says R, which tells me it goes on the right side of the car. Well, the front brakes are fully installed and I really think it looks awesome. I've always liked the look of big brake kits. It's just hard to justify it because they cost so much. In addition to it looking good, I really think it's gonna perform a lot better as well. I mean, really one of my big complaints about the V6 MR2 was that the brakes just really weren't up to snuff, and it wasn't an issue of like heat. That's why I didn't intend on buying a big brake kit. It was more issue of like, they just didn't stop well because the pad material wasn't that great. So in all honesty, I could have gotten away with just switching out to a more aggressive brake pad. But like I said, this deal popped up and it just, yeah, it made a lot of sense. Earlier, I did mention that I have to run a small spacer because otherwise the wheel's gonna hit the brake caliper here. So if anyone's curious, that wheel is a 17x8 plus 35. And realistically, I only need like a 5 mil spacer. So if anyone else is trying to run a big brake kit, just something to think about. The plan right now is to drop the front end of the car back on the ground, and then we'll pick the back side up and start doing the rear brakes. The back side of the car is lifted up, and it should be straightforward except for the e-brake situation. I'm not exactly sure what to expect there, but in terms of the caliper itself, undo the bolts down here. Right here is the parking brake. There's a little cotter pin, and then I just push this through, and then there's a clip, push that out, and then the parking brake will slide out. That way I can easily pull this off. And then of course I have to disconnect the brake line. The rotor is obviously going to come off, and then I'm going to have to get rid of the brake shield as well. I'm assuming that the parking brake connects somewhere over here and utilizes holes that are already in the knuckle, but I'm not entirely sure. And of course I do know that I'm going to have to run the new parking brake cable because the new parking calipers come with different ones. They're already hooked up, and so I'm going to assume they should just run along the OEM location, so it's going to be plug and play. The rear brakes are out. Unfortunately, the camera did die as I was taking off the rear brake shield. It was the same process as the front. You just kind of snipped it. This one was just a little bit tougher, but still, with the snips, it came out relatively easy. So yeah, now it's bare. So it's about putting the new stuff back on. I'll do the parking brake for last. This is actually the bracket, and I looked up on the Wilhelm Raceworks website. So this longer side goes down, and it's gonna go right into where the brake shield was actually bolted into. Then of course, the other brake caliper is going to go over here, so it'll be a dual caliper setup. On the rear, the rotors are not that much smaller than the new ones, but these are off of a turbo chassis. So this car is an NA chassis, and when I got it, it had NA brakes up front and then turbo brakes in the back. Right here are the turbo calipers. These definitely could use a rebuild. I'm going to end up selling these, but yeah, the size difference there is freaking ginormous. The back caliper is fully installed. So it went in pretty smooth for the most part. The only kind of like thing I wasn't sure about was like, how am I supposed to route the cable for the parking brake? But what I kind of just logically deducted was it should be routed through here. My only concern there is that, you know, is it going to get too close to the axle? Of course, it still has to be routed all the way through, so I have to remove the stock parking brake and then go from there. If anything, I could just kind of zip tie it out of the way and it should be fine. The plan right now is I'm going to go ahead and do the driver's side off camera just to get it knocked out real quick, and then we'll pick this back up when I start routing the parking brake cables. We got the other side done. Bolted right up just like it should. At this point, all that's left is to route the parking brake cable, adjust it if it's needed, and then bleed the brakes, and then the brakes are going to be good on this car. To start, we're literally just going to follow the parking brake back and then undoing it as we go. As we follow the parking brake back, there's two little brackets that hold it in place, and then there's going to be this third one which has a 10 mil bolt that you have to undo. And sometimes the parking brakes will get stuck there, so you kind of have to muscle them out a little bit. There we go. Coming further down, we have a little grommet here. You just push it out of the way. The parking brake goes through this little bracket here. There's another little grommet on the inside there. And then right here at the very end is where the parking brake cable attaches to. And now all we got to do is just pull the parking brake out. If you notice here, the old one has a couple grommets on it. And then if we look at the new cable, there isn't any. I read the instructions and it seems like that this kit actually comes with some rubber grommets that would be inserted into the chassis just to secure the cable better. Because I bought this secondhand, I didn't get those. So what I'm gonna do is I'll probably just get like a rubber grommet assortment kit and then just find one that fits. In the meantime, I'll just end up zip tying it. I do want to be clear though, that is not a permanent solution because this is exposed cable and I do not want that like rubbing up because eventually it'd fail. That is for another day though. Right now we're gonna route the parking brake cable. And to get this lined up, I like to bring this back a little bit, push it into place, and it should hold. Right here is one of those places where I mentioned there should be a grommet. Go right through there. And if I do end up needing to make adjustments, all I'll have to do is undo these 2 locking nuts. And then obviously I can adjust the nuts. And if I make the bracket go more that way, that's gonna tighten things up. If it's more this way, it will loosen things up. It did take a few times, but I adjusted the e-brake off camera and it works really good now. When I read the instructions, I realized it's recommended that you zip tie the parking brake cable to the strut rod. The parking brake does run under the axle, so to avoid hitting it, that's why that's recommended, and it makes a lot of sense. So I went ahead and, as I mentioned, I hit it with some zip ties, or secured it with some zip ties, and I don't think that should end up hitting the axle. All that's left to do is bleed the brakes on this car, but I'm gonna save that for another day. Something I thought about doing for a while is ordering a proportioning valve. I just never did it, but now with the new brake setup, it honestly makes a lot of sense. So my plan is to see what the ETA on that would be and then go from there. But I do understand some people may be watching this and using it as a guide, so if that's you, bleeding the brakes is gonna be totally normal. You obviously are gonna start from like the furthest brake caliper and then work your way to the one that's closest to the master cylinder. The only thing that's a little bit different about these calipers is there's actually 4 bleeder valves. You do not have to touch the bottom ones. Those are only on the bottom, so like the caliper can be used on either side, it doesn't matter. The instructions that I read on the Wildwood website said that you just have to bleed the outer bleeder valve, and then you would go to the inner one, and then obviously you would repeat that on the subsequent brake calipers. That's all the work that we have left for today, but before we go, I did kind of want to share some of the winter plans for this car. As I mentioned, initially the plan was just to leave the car alone, but because, you know, just the right parts came up, I figured why not? So what ended up happening was my buddy John was parting out his 2GR MR2 that he uses for time attack. I ended up buying quite a bit of parts from him. I ended up buying his wing off of him. I bought his front hood, which already has a vent. I also bought his front bumper off of him. This bumper is really clean, but it does have 2 little holes right here where he had the fender flares on. In addition to that, I bought his fenders that have the flares on them. The plan is I'm gonna put all those parts on this car because it makes sense since this is, you know, like the race car build. These fenders and bumper on this car are like in pristine shape. So I'm gonna take these body panels and I'm gonna put them on the white MR2, which makes a lot of sense because this car is gonna be stock body. Essentially, it's gonna be like a sleeper 2GR. I do hesitate to use the word sleeper, but the reality is with the white MR2, as I mentioned, the chassis is gonna be stock, and if someone looks at it, I would want them to think the car is stock with maybe the exception of like wheels. And the reason for that is I really like how the MR2 looks in stock form. I know a lot of people do like side skirts and this and that, but I like the stock body. I'm pretty excited because I feel like I'm definitely gonna make substantial progress on the MR2s over this winter, and it's something that I've wanted to do for the longest time. Now it's finally happening, so it's pretty cool. If you want to see more MR2 content, definitely follow along, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video.